That'd even be the only time that I can recall we've had variances, which we always wrangle over.
Yeah.
Yeah, the code is
That's right.
very difficult when it
Yeah.
comes to variances.
Yeah.
And is that about it, Lyle? Is that about the only thing that in the code that sends things to the planning commission is kind of on an appeal basis? I mean, normally it would go to the appeals process, right?
So the way our ordinances are set up on a land use decision, at least as far as appeals go, if it's an administrative decision dealt with by staff, an appeal first goes to the planning commission.
Oh, okay. All right.
And then if that decision is appealed, it would go to, we have a land use hearing officer, an appeal authority is set up that would then consider it after that point. So you may have the opportunity to see those more frequently, and what we've done traditionally here with our staff is when we see decisions arise where there's conflict or debate between a developer, for example, and our staff as to how to interpret something and how to deal with it, we've often brought it to the commission for an interpretation prior to a formal decision by staff,
Sure.
kind of to head it off. So that's more frequent what we've seen, and I can see at least a few cases that we've probably done 3 or 4 with this commission, kind of under that nature. But it could be that, yeah, I make a call and someone second guesses that and comes to you to appeal that.
Then do we treat it as an appeal or do we treat it de novo?
I believe you're an appeal based on the facts that were given to staff and kind of on the record basis appeal versus a de novo review.
Do we identify it that way in the ordinance?
That's a good question.
I mean, yeah, I would be happy to look it up, but the Wi-Fi doesn't work in here very well.
I think we're going to hear that more often now that he's chair. Not just every other commission meeting, but maybe every commission meeting. Okay, are we done? Okay. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the June 27 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting of June 27th, 2019.
I'll second that.
Aye.
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 I'll just note, I think I've asked this before and I can't remember what the question is, but when we weren't here, is it appropriate to approve minutes when, you know, I wasn't?
You weren't in the meeting?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
3 of
someone
us
was
here
in
are kind of like,
Yeah.
sure, sounds good to me. I mean, it's
I
not a
think
big
so,
deal.
because
but-
we can review them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
But normally the approval is, this is what happened, these are the minutes, it jives, we're good. But, so, anyway,
oh, yeah, good.
okay. Next is conditional use permit for tennis lessons at 102 South Shadow Way for Michael Scott Jones.
Okay, again, just by way of introduction to the item and to remind some of our new planning commission members to get you up to speed. Within our residential districts and agricultural districts where we find most residences throughout town, we allow for home businesses. We have several hundred within Kaysville of all types and varieties. Some of those are classified as a minor home occupation that we just deal with internally as staff. They would be a type where you wouldn't even know they're there necessarily, no customers, no equipment, someone doing taxes or accounting or something perhaps at a computer. Versus then we have major home occupation categories. The Planning Commission reviews 2 of those, major home occupation A, which we see extremely rarely. There are just very few categories for that. And the most common you'll see are these major home occupation B considerations. We just recently made changes within our ordinance to allow a 3rd category, major home occupation C, to be dealt with by staff of just a few select businesses. So this B type application primarily deals with businesses that are having customers come to their home, often in groups. And you'll see with the 2nd application, certain types of businesses that may have more equipment under the consideration. So in this particular case, Mr. Jones, you can see here on the map, has a home with a tennis court that has been built on site, and is hoping to use that to offer during good weather months some lessons. And they would be private lessons, probably small group, one-on-one, up to 4 students at a time. Based on our review with this as staff, he's got a lot of parking along the side of his house, along the north side there, where customers or clients could come and wouldn't be in the way of any of the neighbors. Clearly, he's got the facilities for it, good fencing in place. I believe there's no lighting currently on the site, so he would just do it during daytime hours. With that, staff is recommending approval, but because it is a group scenario, our ordinance requires that as a condition there be a limit placed on the number of students allowed. And with that, it was our recommendation as staff that we limit that to no more than 8 students at any one time. Again, as a conditional use, we talked about that a little bit. We're looking to see if there are impacts, if there's any other unique conditions that you can find a nexus to that you feel is appropriate to put a condition to. You're welcome to consider that. I believe the applicant's here this evening. If you have any questions of them or of myself, I'd be happy to take those at this time, and I'll turn the floor back to you, Mr. Chair, for...
Thank you. Are there any discussions? Do we want to have the applicant come up and answer questions or concerns? Okay. Would you come forward, please? Oh, there.
Scott.
You don't look like Scott.
I'm his wife, Barbara Jones, and I'm actually
You could approach the mic for us, ma'am. So, yeah,
Just state your name into the microphone so they can get it on the record. That'd be
okay.
great.
Barbara Thompson Jones.
Thank you.
I have a question. How old will your students be? Just ages. I'm just curious.
They're usually anywhere from about 8 to 18.
Okay.
Sometimes adults too.
So,
but
that's what I wondered.
yeah.
You do adult lessons.
Sometimes a little bit younger, but not much younger.
Okay.
So a question for you, and maybe for Lyle as well. The limit you've got recommended here is 8. What was the basis for the number of 8?
That's probably the 2 people who aren't here to discuss it more. They came up with that more directly, but Dan from our office primarily was working with Michael, I think, on consideration with this, and I believe that they felt that that wouldn't limit them to what they intended to do, but they just ensured us that it wouldn't get larger than there was anticipated. I don't know if there's a specific tie to amount of frontage or parking areas, but probably would typically handle anyway, the needs of the applicant.
Does that sound right? Like 8, is that
Yeah,
a burden?
I don't think we'll ever do 8.
Okay.
It's usually just 1 or 2. It's private.
Okay. So that's not a problem if we limit it to.
No,
Okay.
I don't think I would even put that many people on a court at the same time.
How many sessions do you anticipate having between 9 and 1?
They go about an hour.
And-
So
okay.
yeah, and so about 4 maybe.
4 sessions.
Yeah.
Okay.
On your north side, is there fencing, or is your all access through the front of the house?
There's fencing around the court, but then there's a little path near the court from the north side. They can just walk to
Okay.
the court door.
So that north side, you can get access, portion there on the, and
Yeah.
blocking up the neighbors, okay?
And I don't think I don't think we'd have more than probably 2 cars or, yeah, there's never a lot.
Okay. Any other questions? I'll take a motion.
I make a motion to approve conditional use permit for a major home occupation B for group tennis instruction at 102 South Shadow Way for Michael Scott Jones, as per the recommendations made by the staff report.
Second.
Can you start us off?
Aye.
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 Aye. Great, thank you. Good luck.
Thank you. Thanks.
Next, a conditional use permit for major home occupation B, handyman and fence repair for Eric Larmore at 595 East, 100 South.
Okay, and again, by way of introduction, we have the same type of application as another major home occupation B. This property just down the street to the east of us on the corner, Mr. Larmore, I'm probably saying that incorrectly, but essentially has a truck and trailer, does most of his work, and most of his materials are on site, where he does fence repair and other handyman services. No signage, and he's got a fence around it, so when he's parking his trailer home in the evening, my understanding is it'll typically be behind the fence, screened, where you wouldn't know it's there. Based on our staff's conversation with him and review of the request, we're recommending approval of the major home occupation B for the handyman and fence repair without the need for additional conditions. And again, I believe he's here this evening to get into more specifics if needed, and I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you. Any discussion? Would you like to have the applicant come forward? Okay. Do you want to come forward? We're not sure.
I don't have any questions.
You can, look, you came here, you might as well, right? Okay. State your name, please.
Eric Larmore.
Thanks.
So the question I guess I have is just, I mean, what we're really basically talking about is a pickup truck and a trailer.
Yes.
And that's about it.
Yep.
That's the only impact, so to speak,
Yep.
that will
No,
be.
there's not going to be any deliveries. There's nobody coming. It's basically all labor. I go out. I can't do your fence from my house, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, okay.
And the trailer's not going to be parked on the street, is that right?
Nope, I back it into the driveway.
Okay.
Doesn't sound a whole lot different than a lot of other people that have trailers.
Yeah.
I guess I have one question. So will you use your home or your location to store leftover wood or supplies or materials or?
Rarely, and if I do it, it would be on the trailer,
Okay,
ready to
move somewhere? Okay,
take to a house or drop back off at the shop where we pick up our materials.
okay, thanks.
Great. Any other questions? All right, we'll take a motion. Thank you.
I'll make a motion that we grant a conditional use permit for a major home occupation B handyman and fence repair to Eric Larmore at 595 East 100 South with no additional conditions.
Second.
Wilf?
Aye.
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 Aye. Did that? Okay. Good luck. Next is conditional use permit for telecommunications tower for T-Mobile / Rock Shooter at Barnes Park, approximately 950 West Sportsplex Drive.
You'll remember this from our last meeting. We discussed this for a while regarding the proposal for removing a light standard on one of the baseball fields in Barnes Park and replacing it with a tower that would also have a light on it, considered a stealth tower based on our ordinances. Just as a quick refresher, since we do have a couple new bodies here on the commission this evening, I'm going to go through the imagery here. So T-Mobile, and again, their representatives here this evening to speak to this, is looking to improve services and offload some of the signal in the purple area here in the middle of the map off of I-15. So there are some other towers in the area, but they've informed the commission at the last meeting and staff that locating on those existing monopoles is outside of the range of where their services and equipment need to be located to provide the function that they're looking for. With that, they provided us with some, I'm going to call them the wrong thing, but heat maps of sorts, and I'll let Mr. Schutzer speak to that more specifically, showing why and where they're trying to put that service. So with that, the applicant approached Kaysville City with interest in having a tower located within this area. We worked with them as staff, going over several different options, different locations within the park, considering what would or wouldn't work for the city, and in particular the Parks and Rec Department and the functions of the park and the aesthetic to keep it as they desired. And based on that, it was determined to look at a pole. It's a little hard to see on this map, but if you can see my cursor on the screen, located on the northeast ball field, it's about 2 lights in that would be removed and replaced. With that, they would put compound in place where the supporting equipment for the tower would be located. There'd be space enough for equipment for 2 users. It would be screened by a masonry wall of sorts that, per the Parks Department's request, would match some of the materials on buildings and other structures within the park. It's that red color of sorts is what would be anticipated to be used. And then the tower itself is requested at 90 feet, which is the cap that would be allowed under the telecommunication tower ordinance as a stealth tower, where T-Mobile is looking to take the top location on that tower. There would be space for a future user, not currently in consideration, but you can see the second set of equipment above the light standard. So the poles are approximately 70 feet in height now. You can see where the light is would be put back at about that same height to match the other lighting within the area is the proposal. Since the last meeting, we've looked at it again from a staff perspective, met again with the Parks Department and some of the utility, in particular power utility within the city, to determine if there were other locations. We had talked about different parts within the park for a number of reasons that we've essentially come back to that original location, which is kind of what we vetted through the first time. To some of the questions that the Planning Commission raised the last time, looking into our ordinances, in particular with the south side of the park, the ordinance does not allow the towers to be located within 300 feet of a residential zoning district. And that comes right up here. It's a little tough to see, but this manicured lawn in the bottom left is actually a residential property that goes all the way out to Angel Street, so that distance requirement alone eliminates a lot of options. But based on access to utilities, maintenance access, function of the park programs and the like, it's been pushed back there, and what, anyway, from the park's perspective, it's also one of the more screened areas from the trees. So we heard some public comment last time as well, obviously with regard to some of the concerns on the impact with that. And my discussion with Mr. Mills here and other staff, I think with the consideration of the Planning Commission, we're looking pretty specifically at this location based on the details of the report, based on the way that the ordinance is set up. Some of the discretion that the commission may have is, of course, still there, but probably rather limited in how far location or considerations could be made when we're looking at a specific spot and part of the application. So that for the consideration. The applicant may have additional information for, as was requested, as far as the RF engineer and some of their work that they've looked to, and can update you on that since the last meeting. Probably it might do sense for now, but again, be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. For those of us who weren't here, the main concerns I saw some discussion about trees, and was it just kind of the aesthetics of the location, or what was the?
I mean, the biggest concern was from an adjacent property owner to the north. I don't know if I have a pointer. The office building due north of. Yeah, okay. Ooh, green.
Which one do you want?
This building owner right here, I believe it was this building owner, was concerned about just the aesthetic of it. I mean, that largely was, if you boil down, probably 45 minutes, maybe an hour.
Yeah.
If you boil it down, that was the concern.
Okay.
But I will add that one thing that I took some time to educate myself a little bit more about our ordinances, and it really wasn't our decision to look at aesthetics. It was just to look at the ordinance and see if it meets it. And that's a decision that we had. And so that's why it's back, because based upon that decision, it's just up to us to decide if it fits. And we had some great discussion last time, and it does.
But we have
so.
some latitude to discuss whether it creates problems that can't be mitigated. Right?
That, I mean, yeah, so right, I mean, we talked about, I think it was paragraph 7, there's three portions of paragraph 7, and we were saying, okay, what is the reasonably anticipated detrimental impact? And sort of ostensibly, it was the visual impact, and then one thing that stuck in my mind was, to that adjacent property owner, okay, how does that impact your business? How does that impact your use of that property? And in my opinion, the conclusion I drew from the answer was it doesn't really. It might, maybe, but we just don't want it there because we think it might. And I thought, well, a tenant looking at that space is probably not going to not come in there simply by virtue of that out their window. That was my own opinion. So,
But in the minutes, it did say that he said that the tenants wouldn't like it as much, right?
Yeah,
but he didn't have like a hard example, at least from what I heard.
yeah.
That was just like a speculation.
Well, and I would say generally, the reason why people wouldn't like telecommunications towers is because of the way they look, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that it doesn't look like it's specifically provided for in here, but to me, that's the question of whether it fits in the.
And so here's the rub there. They're going to go somewhere in the city. I think we could unanimously say we're not going to put them in the middle of an R120, right, smack in the middle. So where else would they go? Near the business park, in a park, near businesses. Businesses don't like it, but that's not as bad as in the middle of an R120, right? So they have to go somewhere. The visual aspect's going to be bad wherever they are.
So from a perspective of zoning, I think you're touching on the very point. You're putting in an industrial and or zoned area that has that aesthetic, and I think that meets the definition of where it needs to go. And I think, it does have, there is within 300 feet of that residential, we're trying to protect that buffer zone of the residential. But I think also you are putting it towards your business area, so it meets that need and meets that strength. The other thing is I do think it strengthens the business area over there because you are providing service to the businesses that do have that high quality or have a higher density during the day and have that higher need of cell phone service during the day. So I think it would, in the end, benefit the businesses in the long run versus the aesthetic.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I would just say, and I'm not saying I'm against it, but I would just say, if you'd say where's the obvious place to put a big hunk of machine equipment, it wouldn't be in the middle of a beautiful park, and it wouldn't be to take down mature trees to do it. And
We talked about the trees. I agree with that.
I know you're kind of a tree guy, so that's why I looked at you when I said that. But and so this brings me to what I've talked about, over the years is how good is the disguise? And I saw those renderings that weren't very illustrative, but I could see at night the lights are going to be below it and it won't be a big problem, but in the days it can look just like a bald tower.
Well, I mean, I get your point about the park on one hand, but on the other hand, this is sort of it's an active park, and so with active parks you have light poles. So this will be on an existing light pole. It'll replace the light pole, but it's just, a light pole was already there.
No, that's my question is how different is it going to look from a light pole that we already tolerate, right? And if it's going to look just looks like a little bit more, then it's not a big deal.
And so after this, we had this. I tried to make a conscious effort of seeing the things that you don't see, like power lines. I mean, that's the thing. In Kaysville, unlike many cities, we have power lines everywhere.
Yeah.
You don't see them or notice them really until someone runs into one on I-15. But that's the same thing with this, in my opinion. We don't even notice it until we notice it, and then we might not forget it. But if you're not thinking about it, you don't even see it. That's at least how I view it.
And my perspective on this was kind of like, and I agree, I get your point, and others have made the point that, why do we want to put these in parks? And yet when you look around, the Wasatch Front in general, a lot of these are in parks.
Yeah.
It's really kind of surprising how many of them are in parks. And I bet you're saying that, or others are saying that, because they don't even notice them. They don't even know they're there. And so from that standpoint, I say, well, okay, that's not that unusual. And if the applicant has a location here, and if the city, who is the owner of the park, is willing to let them come in, from my standpoint, I'm fine to grant them approval to locate anywhere in the park that works for both parties, and let them work out the specific location.
Well, and I disagreed with you the last time just because I thought the same thing. I was thinking, oh, why in a park? But now I understand that after learning a little bit more, if it meets the ordinance and it's allowed, it's our job to recommend or approve it based upon our ordinance, not necessarily whether or not we want it there or we like it necessarily, and really a city council decision as to how, what they're going to actually do. So.
I disagree. I think we have a right and an obligation as a planning commission to look at this and say, hey, this is ugly, this doesn't work here, and within the circumstances, we shouldn't allow it. And that's what I think that's our prerogative. Now, that being said, I'm not saying it is, and we shouldn't. I'm just saying, I think we have that obligation, and I think one of the problems with Kaysville and other cities like ours is that throughout time, we've kind of allowed mechanical looking things and junky looking things to kind of populate our neighborhoods, and now we drive by and they're there and we see them, we try to ignore them, but it's,
Well, that was kind of the
could look
purpose.
better.
That was kind of the whole purpose in putting together, I guess, is what you're saying, for the stealth
Right.
tower requirements or the ordinance to.
Yeah, and I've in my professional life, I've had occasions to negotiate with cell tower companies, and sometimes they come up with really good ideas, and sometimes they're not so good. The stealth disguises, and I'm not saying, again, I'm not making a judgment on this particular situation, but I think that's what you ought to be careful of, because parks are pleasant places to be, and we don't want to encumber them with too much.
I mean, so with the stealth, the way I look at it, I might have used the phrase lipstick on a pig last time, and in some respects, this is quote unquote a pig. And so we're not going to change a pig, although there are options to make it look like I don't know, what's a pretty animal? Because we saw when we were looking at this pictures of like palm tree. We're not going to put that in Kaysville, but you can make a cell tower look like a palm tree, or there's one in Sandy Cemetery I know right now that looks like supposed to look like a spruce tree or something. It's not a very good one, but and so that's like almost the opposite. You're like trying to hide it, and you bring attention to it. So I don't know that we don't want to do, at least in my opinion, we don't want to do that here. So what do? You say, how do we hide it? You hide it in infrastructure that's already there. That's one way you hide it, and this is doing that.
Yeah.
So it's trying to mitigate it in some respects.
And we can have them replace trees that they remove, right? And we can ask for that to kind of minimize.
Yeah, certainly you could ask for that. One caveat or something to that, I suppose, or at least a request of the property owner. I believe our Parks Department more than happy to replace and put in new trees. Obviously, they're probably not going to be the same scale and maturity.
Yeah.
Although I do know one of the reasons this site was something of interest is the trees that would go were not their favorite trees on the property. But they would.
Parks Department's non-favorite trees.
Those specific trees. So
they're not liked by the Parks Department.
correct.
Just curious. I didn't know they ranked them like that.
And so what they
there's bad trees and good trees.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, and what they've requested is, should the commission think additional trees are necessary, to leave that up to our arborist to decide where and how they go in. He's very particular, and I know there's some expertise up there, but if that seems like something you'd like to go with, at least that's the request. Is I think there's a willingness and happiness to put them back in, but maybe the language of planting something that would assist in screening. You could put in a number of trees probably, and then he would locate them accordingly.
Okay, this isn't a public hearing, but I've seen you raise your hand like 4 times. So why don't you come on up and state your name and give us a brief comment if you have it.
My name is Elizabeth Nielsen, and I am the property owner. And I thought you were maybe missing a piece of information that might be useful to you. And that is that after the meeting 2 weeks ago, we did talk with T-Mobile, Rock Shooter, and he did come down. We offered to explore the possibility of actually putting the tower on our northwest corner of our parking lot. So essentially putting it within the buildings instead of in the park. And he went down with my brother, who was also here last time, and they looked at it, looked like it might be feasible, but we never heard anything back from T-Mobile. So I just wanted you to know that we did offer that, and we're still offering that if that is something that works. So just thought you might want that piece of information.
Great, thank you.
I mean, that was going to be my question, because I knew that that's where our meeting ended, was they were going to talk, so I was curious what came of it.
And is there, do you want to address that, or Lyle, go ahead.
Yes, Rock Schucher. Let me very quickly go back to the beginning, and that is by commenting in response to her, we did have a conversation. We looked at that location. We took the time to have our RF engineer look at it, and we backed up and came right back to the position that we have an application for in the park. We spent a lot of time, a certain amount of money, coordinating with the city and the Parks Department to get something that they like. It works best for T-Mobile right there. It's a quarter-mile north to go to the back lot of the property in question. So that's a big difference in RF standards. I just wanted to say that our application does meet the standard of the ordinance. And the beautiful thing is there are 12 70-foot lights there. We're asking to add 20 feet to one light standard. As you look at the property from the north, in fact, from that office property, you see the light standards and you see the lights. And at night, you really see the lights. Yes, we'll have an additional 20 feet there, but it's the best way to use the stealth ordinance to accommodate the need for RF signals in that area. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but we really meet the ordinance.
So I have a couple comments. So maybe before I ask this, Lyle, or even Nick, this residential I know there's a home here, but is this parcel zoned residential, or is it non-conforming residential?
Yeah, so the corner lot, and I'll pull it up for you on a better map so we can see further out. So this entire piece and these homes here are all zoned to the RA, residential agricultural zoning. And so yeah, the homes are well up front, but while there's potential change for that, it's current
Is the
zoning.
language to a residential zone, or to the residential lot, or to the residence?
Yeah, so let me make sure I'm accurate in it, but I believe that no tower shall be located closer than 300 feet to the residential zoning boundary.
Okay,
So let me.
So there's a 300-foot buffer here anyway.
Yeah.
And to use my golf analogy, that's about a lob wedge, sand wedge.
Yeah, it says must be at least 300 feet from the property
300
line of a
feet,
residential
what's 300
zoning district.
feet?
It's 100 yards.
So it is the district line itself, not
the
the
lob
actual
wedge?
home.
And so then I guess makes my next question moot. I was going to say, did you evaluate over here? And I guess you can't, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that 300 feet wipes out, this is rough, but you talked about 12 poles, over half of them fall within that radius. And again, we honestly, that ordinance aside, at least working with T-Mobile, didn't explore those locations in great detail with our park staff, because simply for servicing and access and those needs from our end were far from desirable. Also to their needs, it was much further outside of their area than they preferred. So, but since our last meeting, I found that it kind of precluded that additional exploration, is that the zoning district wouldn't even permit it based on that proximity.
And this is a lease from the city?
Yeah, so currently it would be before the city council to consider a lease agreement with them. So again, the city council has some different prerogative acting as the property owner under the consideration. But the idea would be T-Mobile would build the tower, give it to the city, and then lease back the use of that tower to the city.
I was just going to say, I appreciate the conversations that you've had, because, from last time, I wasn't really in favor of it, and I don't to be truthful, I really don't love the idea of it in the park, but our job is to just look at the ordinance that we have in front of us and say, does it meet it or not? And as far as I'm concerned, it does. So that's the way I would lean.
I agree with what you said, and if I could just call your attention to the cell tower on 200 North, right off, let's see, if we look right down that way, that is a obtrusive cell tower. It stands out by itself. We are putting in a cell tower with existing light towers surrounded by trees, so it really has the best benefit of being less obtrusive. When you put a cell tower in a business parking lot, it sticks out like a sore thumb because it's by itself. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, I think I generally, I think going into last meeting, pushed back on both sides on this for a while. At least I tried to, but I'm, basically in agreement with Tammy. With the qualification that this isn't necessarily, and to Matt's point a little earlier, this isn't really a does this meet the ordinance or not issue. If it were that, it wouldn't even be before us. That's a purely administrative. That's is it a permitted use or not? If it is, we must allow it. Conditional uses are not quite that clear. We just get to say, what are the foreseeable detrimental impacts, and can we impose conditions? If the answer to that question is yes, we can mitigate those things by imposing conditions, then we must approve it. And I think the conditions that, we don't have to impose any conditions because, in my opinion, because they're already addressed. It's in amongst some trees, it's only 20 feet taller than multiple other light poles in the park. It's not in the middle of a residential area. It's kind of close to some industrial business park zone. All of those things are conditions that I would suggest, but they're already in the proposal, and therefore I would say we approve it without any more conditions.
Is that a motion?
Unless someone else wants to talk, yeah, sure. I'll make that a motion.
I'll second it.
I think you start, Will.
We ready for a vote?
Is there more discussion to be had?
I was just going to say, can we ask them to replace trees if they have to remove them? I would like to add that. Is it too late to add that?
Is that part of the
I'll amend my motion.
We
We can amend that
okay.
in the motion.
friendly amendment? Okay. You want a second? Someone seconding that?
I'll second. Okay, I made it.
So what was the amendment again?
That any trees that are lost due to the construction would be replaced in the discretion, how about, I'll add this, in the discretion of the Parks Department,
Okay.
Yes.
where they want the tree and the type of tree.
Yeah.
So I think we're ready for a vote.
Ready?
Is that right?
Aye.
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 Okay. Thank you. Let's see. I think we're now to... So we have work session. I wonder if we can do the call to the public first, just in case there's any public that wants to...
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be
Make comment
appropriate if
first.
you'd like to switch the order, not a problem.
We already front-loaded the training, so we're going to have the call to public now, which is another chance for anybody here to come to the podium and comment on anything. Seeing no takers, we'll close the call to the public. And on to the work session.
Okay. For a few of you, I'm sorry. For those of you who are new, we're going to catch you up to speed on just a couple things. But again, as a work session item, we hope that this can be a lot of open discussion and back and forth, and I'd be happy to stay quiet and then honestly let the Planning Commission talk as much as you have interest in doing so. But we'll just do a brief introduction to why we're doing this, what some of this is about, and some of the items of consideration that we've done to date, and at least one item that I think is pretty concrete on how we're going to go forward with this, and I'll start with that. And again, you please interrupt me at any point, ask any questions, make any comments. Would certainly welcome that. It's 8:08, so it's not extremely late, but also to the consideration of your time, let me know if there's reason that we need to wrap things up at any point. But I suspect maybe within 10 minutes here I'll be done with my comments, and maybe that's optimistic, but we'll try not to.
You have 10
speak
minutes.
too much. Okay. So the
You set the timer for yourself? I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
8:09, here we go. So the last legislative session, and as most of you know, and often better than I, the legislature over the past several years has been looking heavily at land use. They constantly do. And in light of Utah's great economy, explosive growth, and high quality of life, a lot of people like to live here, and a lot of businesses are coming here, a lot of jobs produced here. It's not getting any cheaper to live here and find housing, and of course Kaysville is no exception to that. And based on that, the Utah State Legislature passed Senate Bill 34, I think it was the fourth substitute on that, where they finally came to an agreement on some of the parameters of this, where they're essentially mandating that cities, Kaysville included, have a handful of elements within their general plan, one of which is an affordable housing element. And so we do have some of that, but we've got some work to do to come into compliance with what they've asked for. So what we're talking about, and based on the legislature, and I took this from the Wasatch Front Regional Council, I think it's two-part from what it states within the legislation is not just providing housing options at different price ranges that different people are able to afford, but it's also about housing choice and providing homes for people of different interests or different stages in their life within the community. So you see some different options here, and it kind of shows somebody progressing through their life from one housing type to the other as they have children or children move away or so on and so forth, different stages in your career. I think we'll see that as part of our conversation as we talk about housing options. I may be off in the weeds here, but often, in my opinion, it's not necessarily what it is, but how it's done. You can see single-family, large lot homes that are poor in quality and don't bring value to a community. Conversely, you can see that same large lot, single-family home be done very well and bring value to the neighborhood and the community, and that would go for any one of these housing types and products, in my opinion, as we discuss this. Of course, there are multiple ways to approach this, and I'll get into that next. Not all of those options are about providing different types of housing. That's probably a clear way that we could address this as an option. And what we're doing here at this point is we've been starting with the Planning Commission to find out from you as community leaders and appointed officials what direction the city ought to take that meets a Kaysville flavor. How can we address it that works for our community and still meets the mandates that the state has put forth for us? So to give you more specifics on how this bill is set up, is there are 24 separate provisions that the legislature's outlined as options for a community, and we have to pick at least 3 of them to implement and put into our general plan, and ultimately we want ordinances that help put those on the ground, right? So but with this, it's our general plan focus that we need to have put into place. And this is not all of them, but these are ones that have been previously identified as not necessarily the answers, but items of interest to the commission. Commissioner Lyon, it looks like.
So I was going to ask you, when was the last time the city did a housing study looking at densities and types of housing in the city? Has the city commissioned that recently?
Yeah, so to what detail, I don't know if one's ever been done in my tenure for about 5 years on a specific housing study. So we do have some data, census data and things that shows some typical housing prices, incomes, and that type, and I'll share some of that with you this evening if you're interested. But our housing stock.
Is that pulled from Esri?
Well, so we do have some Esri data as well that we utilize. The data that I've got this evening is straight from the U.S. Census Bureau and their quick facts on some of that. So we look at some different sources. It tends to be broader level data rather than maybe home specific. It's something that I'm hoping to do. So, I think something we've agreed on here as a commission is it's a pretty big bite to swallow, I guess, on this particular one, an important issue for the community. I've heard from you that we ought to outreach to the community and get their input as well as a part of this. So we are looking at on August the 14th, it's a Wednesday, holding an open house where we will be talking about housing choices and options to get some community input. I'm thinking of some different boards and activities or something they can do at tables as they go around to learn about why we're doing it, what some of the different things mean, help understand their preferences and the things they think should be important for the community. And one of those, maybe to Commissioner Lyons' point, and I'd certainly entertain other ideas if there's some more specifics, but putting together based on assessor data for valuation of homes within Kaysville, a map of essentially home value, so we can see ranges on what we have as far as our inventory and in stock. And we've got the data. It shouldn't take us too much longer to produce that, but I hope so. It will be ready at least by then. And I hope to show it to you at our next Planning Commission meeting to see if that's something we want to utilize at that meeting, among other things.
So just as a comment, I've got a study from James Wood that the county did in 2014 that I'll share with you because, and the county's going to go back. I mean, we're looking at doing a similar study, housing stock countywide, for this exact reason and sharing with the cities. It's critical. We are losing. I shouldn't say losing. We are in a push right now where our housing choices are limited and our land is slowly. I mean, you got the northwest quadrant, the north end of the county, another area of the county where the housing choices are becoming limited because the land is starting to get utilized by other choices. The county did this with James Wood out of the Gardner Institute back in 2014, and we'll probably tap that, put it out for RFP here in the fall. So watch for that, but I have the data from 5 years ago for you to utilize. So it's more granular than the census data for you.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. And I think we may find that as we're looking to fulfill a mandate from the state by the end of the year. Doesn't mean we can't make it better after that case. So we may be forced to make certain decisions based on that time frame. But yeah, I'd love to see that, Commissioner Lyon, if we can get the updated version of that. And as we continue to make changes and as we continue to get better data, we can certainly improve and refine those decisions we make in the short term.
I think that would be phenomenal. And the further we go into this process, the more refined it gets. We need data. We need to know what is existing, what is the current picture of Kaysville, and how do we want it to stay the same, and how do we want it to change, if at all. Because, I mean, as an example, when we look at point A, because I think these are the ones that we kind of pinpointed. If we looked at paragraph A and we say, okay, if we're going to rezone or zone certain areas for higher densities, where are those going to go? And we could probably generally, in our own opinions, say, I think here or here. But if it's a more data-driven decision, it's going to be, I think, a better decision and a more defensible decision.
I agree.
Exactly.
And I think we'd be capable of producing some pretty sophisticated maps or items and data to help you. And what I'd be interested from the commission is maybe what that looks like. It might be different to you than what I'm thinking. I think that would be an exercise that would be great in an open house, is to have, here's a map of the city, and we talked about this under numerous rezone applications. Point at us, put a sticker on, or whatever it's going to be, the location where you think different housing types ought to go, and different color stickers, or however we want to do it.
Yeah,
represent different
I think that would be really helpful.
Certainly we could do that.
Are you going to include in that? I know I've had a couple neighbors who've expressed interest in agricultural preservation. Is that going to be part of that discussion also?
Has not been on my radar to do so, but we could do that.
Preserving open space.
That'll be probably part of the plan update, right?
So my current thinking was this particular open house would be very specific to housing.
Right.
Okay, perfect.
But again, at your direction, if it's the consensus of the commission that now's the time to do that, and maybe to frame things just a little bit also, because we got a lot happening, at least for Kaysville, I think, and we're busy. So we're currently working with a consultant, and Mr. Jessup, that's usually here with me, is across the street now, getting input from the community as we're doing a strategic plan process to help identify priorities and options that they're interested in. I'm hopeful, that's still got a few months to wrap that up and some of the details on it, but we also have received funding through Wasatch Front Regional Council to hire a consultant to help us with a general plan update specifically, and that will be starting, I probably tell you a different time frame every time I'm around here, but at least late fall I think is, probably optimistic at this point, but we are gearing up to do that. Open space preservation, all kinds of issues I think will come out of that business, non-housing related items that we can address with that in great detail.
Well, and I think with the time frame that we've got, how quickly we need to get this housing plan finished or ready to adopt per the state requirement, that probably ought to just focus on the housing.
Clarification on item E, would that account for like these, I've seen a concept home in like City Creek Center, like for these, it's like a cottage style home that you can put on an existing lot where there's a house already there, you have some little space behind it, so you put this kind of like a mother-in-law apartment behind your house. Is that what E is talking about?
An accessory dwelling unit is exactly that. So there are multiple ways that they can do that. It's precisely what you're thinking, Commissioner Barris, where it could be a detached housing unit, often much smaller than the primary home on the property. It could also be part of the home itself, so a basement apartment or above the garage, something like that. So there are multiple ways we can address them. And yeah, I think that one is one that I've heard interest in from Kaysville residents on being able to do on their property. Currently, we only allow one dwelling on a property. 90+% of the residential in Kaysville is a single family detached. They're only allowed to have one building on there that's used as a residence.
So backing up on that same question, how many cities in Kaysville offer ADUs?
Cities in Kaysville, cities in the state?
In Davis County.
I don't know all. I know Farmington does to the south. We can look at that. I had a presentation and I could get the data very quickly from the last APA conference. Sandy City gave one where they've dotted the map with, they're all over Utah. Farmington City was of interest in particular. Speaking with their staff, they've had it for years as an option on the books, but they don't see that many applications come forward with it. So I think there's a little bit of a fear once you put it in that overnight you're essentially going to double the density because now you allow that second unit in the backyard type idea. But at least from their experience, having allowed it for many years, it's just the odd home that does it. But I'd be happy to get that. I know I can certainly find how many cities do it. And we can research.
In that same discussion, if we look at how many cities are doing, I'd like to see what their ordinances look like also, and see if there's some adaptability there for us.
There's a number of cities and ordinances around.
Yeah.
And more all the time. It's an option that's getting more and more popular.
Salt Lake City's done it, I know.
Yeah, we did it when I was at Salt Lake City, and because of public objection at the time, it was very limited, but they've since expanded it.
I think very recently it's become a lot more open. Yeah, I'm happy to get that, and we'd be happy to look at the data on others. We've started doing some of that to see ideas, and you'll see language that the unit can only be so large, either in a specific square footage or as a percentage of the property or in a percentage of the primary home. You can limit occupants in it compared to a normal home. So there are a lot of ways you can deal with them. Other cities, luckily, have taken those steps before us, so we can often look to them to get their expertise on it. And I think, a number of these, again, are good examples. And in my mind, really the only way the most sure way, and as we've discussed it as staff and with Mr. Jessup, is you reduce square footage, you reduce costs. And that goes both with your lot and the building. And there's just simple math to that, and that would be a big part of it. So different ways to do that is that apartments stacked together, is that simply smaller lots. Currently within our ordinances, within our R1 districts, and R1-8 is our smallest district. Many jurisdictions have an R1-6 and R1-5. They allow for 8 being an 8,000 square foot lot in Kaysville. You could do a 6,000 square foot lot or 5,000 square foot lot, very common in other jurisdictions. And simply by allowing smaller lots, again, you can even do that in Kaysville, but you make a big jump from R1-8 to an R2, which about doubles your density potential. And so I don't know that we've discussed that with this commission during this yet, but that could be another consideration, is maybe we don't have to make an apartment zone, but maybe we make simply a smaller lot residential zone, right? So there's many ways we can look at this. I don't know that the intention tonight is to say this is that way, but again, facilitating the conversation. This is what we're discussing. I'll just bump over here, so good luck reading it over here. Hopefully I can give it to you, but from the Housing and Urban Development Department with the federal government, HUD, they keep track of income limits. We fall within the Ogden-Clearfield metro area, where based on Kaysville's household size of just under 4 persons on a typical household, the average median income is $85,000 within this area. Kaysville's is higher than that. I think it's closer to $95,000. I've got the data, I just don't have the numbers here with us tonight. But so you see, there's an innate issue where our area average is lower than our city's average, which makes it even more challenging to accomplish these numbers that are, for a broader range and a broader area. But when you look at their income limitations of 80%, 50%, 30%, ultimately we're trying to provide housing, and I felt as the more I've looked at the legislation, it's not so specific to say Kaysville has to build 100 homes that will accommodate people at the 30% AMI. Again, I think we get to pick and choose and understand how that works within our community and how it meets Kaysville's flair. But as you look at these numbers, what we are tasked essentially is to find ways to help facilitate housing that a family that has an income of $68,000, for example, could afford to rent or purchase a home based on that income. To give you an idea here, based on the fair market rate from HUD for our zip code, those are what those rent rates should look like. We're still working to get data for you as to what that actually looks like. I think that it's felt that it's much higher on some of these.
For a home in Kaysville, it's about $2,400 a month.
So that would probably come into the 3-4 bedroom range, right, where you're much higher than these numbers. From my math, just simple 30% of your income going towards housing, a home price based on that $68,000 number we saw means somebody could potentially purchase a $226,000 home. And certainly within new construction, which is what I deal mostly with, you don't find homes for that cheap in Kaysville. So saying we've got to find more creative ways to we start facilitating that a little bit. The market's going to come into play a little bit as to how much is actually produced, but are we making it at least possible that they could come within those ranges? Again, a rental rate based on the $68,000 number might be about $1,700 a month, which hits close to these numbers up here. So at least gives you an idea on what we're looking to accommodate. Wasatch Front Regional Council talked about these are your policemen, your teachers, depending on the household and how many workers you have. Again, from the census, this compares us to national averages. Hopefully I don't make you dizzy going left to right, but I think I got to zoom in so we can all read it. So you can see we've got within Kaysville, it doesn't give our housing units. We have roughly 32,000 people as far as our population currently. It's just over 9,000, give or take, residential properties, I think, within the city limits. We have an extremely high owner-occupied rate. That's the 88.7%. Here we see that the median value of those homes is in the $293,000 range, which again is about $70,000 above that number we were looking at as the target. And what that means for those who own their home, how much they're paying, roughly $1,600 a month. Those who don't have a mortgage anymore are still paying in their insurance or taxes. An average of $400 a month is that lower number, and rentals are closer to $850 according to this data. So you can kind of see how that compares with the averages. I don't know if I'll go into this in great detail. I've done my 9 minutes and then some, 10 minutes, whatever. But this would be an item I think we could do with the community at the open house. So as we're talking with them, I think we went up to like 50 units an acre with you last time, but break it down to something that's probably more within our range of here's what, when we say additional density, what that could look like. So whether it's these or something similar, we can provide them with different options of 7 units an acre, 7.5, continue to go up. And again, you'll see within these, again, it's a lot about it, how it's done, not what it is. Some of the lower densities look a lot better than, some of the higher densities look better than some of the lower, so it's all over the board. We could continue to fine tune which examples are provided, but if you think this would be a beneficial exercise to let the community say, you know, we like these types of developments, and sure, maybe they don't belong everywhere, but perhaps this density works in that location. So we'll teach them on that, educate them, and then help them through the map that Commissioner Sunlove was referring to, find homes for these kind of options, if that's of interest. I think that's the crux of what I was hoping to dive into tonight, to bring our new commissioners up to speed on what we're looking at. Happy to, again, take any questions, whether I've got answers now or get homework to provide better answers for you next time on this particular item. I think kind of where we're at is prepping for that August 14th date to have what we need to make it a successful operation where you're getting the input that would be beneficial to you to help make a recommendation to the council.
Thank you. I have one comment. You know, this is kind of the conundrum with kind of the public policy and public input. I think we're going to have a hard time convincing, well, let's put it this way. I'm not sure that the Kaysville general public is going to be excited about any multiple use, no, not open house, although that might be multiple use, multi-unit, kind of these mixed use dwellings. I mean, I think they're exciting. I think we've seen a few examples of them here in Kaysville that have worked well or will work well. And I think that's the wave of the future. I think that's where we need to be. But my general sense of the population is they're going to be very much, they won't be excited about this. And what I would suggest is, as part of your agenda as you talk about this open house, is maybe spending some time setting up the legal background of this as to why it's important. You know, there's the federal funding element to it. There's diversity. There's, you know, people now are, not everybody wants to have a half-acre lot and spend 3 hours a Saturday, you know. And I'm saying that from personal experience. I say that, I think, probably 4 times a year I say that. Like, why do I have such a big yard? So I think I would say your biggest difficulty, your most important task, is the gentle persuasion that these kinds of options are really what we need to do, and for lots of reasons, and that the old dynamic of, you know, an apartment complex, and it looks good the first couple of years, but after 5 or 6 years it all goes to pot, and there's, you know, transient, you know, single people that don't care about their, you know, all that kind of stereotype. We need to address that to get any success in having some public support for what I think we need to do.
Okay.
I'd also add on to that. I'd also take a look at what's going on in Bountiful right now with their downtown redevelopment, because one of the things I think is key to Kaysville is protecting your downtown. The vitality of any city, and you see this statewide, is the downtown urban area, and you have to protect your main street. But I think if you see how Bountiful is, what they're doing in that redevelopment, and they're putting high density in that downtown, and it's mixed use, and it's sharp, and it looks nice. I mean, and it's on a transit line. It's building out the vitality of their main street. I think they've got a good redevelopment plan going. I think that's an idea that can happen. The other thing I think is good is what's going on over in Station Park and Farming. We have some good neighbors that are doing some good planning. And I think that is the idea. I think bringing some pictures and some of those ideas, you know, so here's what's going on in our neighbors. You know, we can have some of this product coming in here, maybe not the same type of product overall, but I think, you know, bring in local that's going on. Some of the theoretical stuff in other communities that, you know, you got to have a planning book don't work, but when you go down and look at the other cities, I would bring that into it, because when they look at that, they say, okay, there are those other cities, they recognize that because they go down there and stuff. I think that's critical. But then talking, protecting the main streets is a big one, because if you don't do that, you lose the identity of your city.
So I'm hearing a couple specific different themes. We've got a map. Do you think I could, how do I, I'll just be right up front and then you guys can answer. Is there interest from the commission in helping and prepare these elements for the meeting? So if I, for example, maybe work with you, Commissioner Lyon, on those examples, perhaps Chair Mr. Anderson on the legal ramifications or why, setting that up, maybe some details there, and with Commissioner Sunlauf, for example, and maybe the map exercise. Are you available or willing to, if I limit how much input you would have to give, if I'm just giving you specific assignments? Again, we do the crux of the work, but to at least use you as a reference, is this, are we getting the right direction? And then when we meet again, we'll have at least one more meeting prior to that date. Then the commission as a whole can give input, and yeah, that we like where that's going. Is that acceptable? You like coming away with homework?
I think so, and I think the other thing, and you referenced, is there's our funding opportunities available. I think we need to talk about that. You know, if the city has a CRA, I mean, 10% of any new CRA does have to go to affordable housing. One of the things in my professional capacity the county is going after is home CDBG funds. Right now, we do get the CDBG, that goes for the infrastructure stuff, but we are going to be chasing, we estimate maybe about $1 million to $1.5 million in home, which is housing funding for this type of product, but none of the cities right now are doing that. It comes through the Olin Walker Fund. So I think the county has a vested interest in this process with all the cities as a partner. So, you know, without having the plan, we can't access the funding. So this is definitely with the cities and with this type of a process, we've got to get this in place to be able then to go back and access the funding, whether it's the state or whether it's the federal, to be able to build this kind of product here. And I think we've got to be able to have the plan in place to get that. I'm more than willing to come up and invest some time working with you.
We'll try not to make it too burdensome, but that would be appreciated, and I think that helps make sure your ideas and your, again, the input you're looking for are accounted for.
I think that's smart.
I have one quick thought. I mean, if I were to guess, I probably would agree with, you know, what Matt said in terms of what the general consensus would be, but that's an assumption in terms of how we think most people in Kaysville would feel about quote unquote higher density, which again, as I've always said, is a relative term. But what I would like to do is try to root out the accuracy of that assumption. And it might be too late and it might not be feasible, but if we had a survey go out to the citywide, like the fiber survey, and ask the right questions, which I think there were some not right questions asked on the fiber survey, but that's a different discussion. Ask the right questions and get the consensus from citywide about what everyone thinks from east to west, north to south about the type of housing and density or not in Kaysville, then I think that would be really valuable information. Because if we get people here to the public open house, those are going to be people who are interested, and maybe it might result in a vocal minority. A survey isn't going to be a perfect tool, but it'll be a better representative of what the city thinks.
People that come to open houses are usually self-selected, and they come because they're opposed.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. They're just people that don't like.
Right.
Is there a way to do a text message sort of?
Yes. So right now, through the city's website platform, people can sign up to, for example, receive information about news and headlines from the city or Parks and Recs information. They get emails and or text. If they go through that, we could send out text messages for people to receive it. So we do have some, I couldn't give you the number, but people who have opted in to those to receive that. Beyond that, I think our email lists are much more robust, but even they would be somewhat limited. But I'm absolutely more than willing to go the survey route in addition to the open house and solicit feedback that way.
What would the process be? How cumbersome, how expensive, all that kind of stuff, a survey?
Well, so we currently have, the city owns a license to Qualtrics, which is a survey platform. So we've used it for, the fiber example was brought up. I've done it with some business issues and others in the past. So to create the survey and distribute it, it's just a matter of the emailing, and I would think it's limited to no cost to send it out. So if we've already got lists and we're sending it out to those
People who responded to fiber, for example, we know that they'll do it, they'll
They've
pay
used it.
attention, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and I was just going to mention, the demographics of the people that will be in favor of higher density housing are probably, people who are retiring, who don't want to mow their lawn, and they're tired, and, they just don't want to spend that much time. And younger kids, I've got a 24-year-old, I have a 20-year-old, talking to them and their friends, they can't afford living in Kaysville, number one, if they wanted to. And if they did live in Kaysville, they don't want large houses, they want to buy a townhouse or something like that. So to reach those people who would actually respond and increase the ability to actually have accuracy in the surveys, I think would have to be done differently. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to do that.
Well, and I'll look to the expertise of the commission there. So what we're finding some success with a strategic plan, as was mentioned, you hold an open house, which is very typical government request or input from the public. You get a limited number of people that show up on and on. We've been trying pretty heavily to go where the public is, and so at events, farmers market or something, we'll gather input. We can head out maybe and collect emails and collect interest from that, have the open house, and perhaps do the survey shortly after. That gives people more time to give us their information, so we have a way to track them down. Maybe that's not necessary, because if they came to the open house, they already gave us their information, and we don't need the survey from them. But
I would add to that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, right?
And
Then
just-
you tap into a bit different demographic.
Well, and just a text. I don't know if that's just really
text,
expensive.
yeah.
But that, I think, would reach more people, and you'd have more of a broad response than email.
Okay.
If depending on how much it costs, but.
Yeah, so
If it
I
even is a cost.
suspect there's probably some cost to it, so I don't know how much it is, but I can find out from it. We can, as administration, find out what to do with it. And again, I'm happy to do it. Maybe we just hit all those platforms, right? I'm saying I think our email list are much more robust, but that doesn't mean we can't also do the text in
Yeah,
addition to
okay.
the email, right? So, yeah. Okay, and then maybe the last question I suppose I have. So at our last meeting, we had a resident who came and was hoping to see more maps or details, and again, I think we'll have those at this open house at the very least, and perhaps we have a landing page on our website where people can also go to see them. Much of that, I think, there's a lot of sources with a lot of data that are already existing. So when they asked the city if we produced anything, perhaps not at this point. We may be capable of doing so. I just, thought this was interesting. So we probably do less than maybe we should as a city, because we're not that large square footage, or excuse me, square miles. We know the area. I could talk to you about probably any one of you, the entire city, and tell you where there are big homes, small homes, price points, just anecdotally what Kaysville is. So probably take that for granted sometimes when maybe people don't realize what it is. So we could produce some maps that show, this one, for example, all that yellow is single-family residential on the Wasatch Front here. This is Kaysville, Layton, Farmington area. People may not realize that that's what it looks like. So we can produce things like this or pull up sources that already have that type of data. We know how old the housing stock is. The darker the red, the newer. So, again, anecdotally, we know that west of I-15 is where all the new homes are being built. This old part of town, you can see a tiny bit of blue. You have much older housing stock. So where is it ripe for redevelopment? We can kind of gauge where that might be based on data like this. Where centers plan within WFRC's data, so you can see that Main Street, North Main Street, and our Main Street area are a corridor center area based on our regional planning agencies' Wasatch Choice 2050 vision. We know where transit is. We know which properties are kept within a range to be able to access that transit. Again, Kaysville, it's Main Street, and so again, anecdotally, we kind of know these things, but we can show and produce these, and I don't know if there are specific items that you think would be helpful to the public to understand if I'm choosing where this density goes, do we want to show it in relation to a bus line? Is that relevant? Is it better do I show the businesses or parks, or what would you think would be most helpful?
I think you need to show I think you need to show the transit and some of those, show the infrastructure. And I think you also need to show future roadway.
Okay.
So particularly West Davis corridor, the impact that's going to have coming in. And I think you also show somewhat the abutment of the neighboring communities where Farmington, from Shepherd all the way up into here, and then also the Layton Parkway.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll probably leave, again, these are fun things to just dig through. Here's the transit lines that circulates around Davis Tech and stuff. So we can certainly get it for people. It comes very quick. We have no problem getting this type of data. Again, just please provide the input on what you think is beneficial, and I really appreciate those comments, Commissioner. Here's an affordability one. This is the Kaysville boundary, essentially, green up in Layton. So the darker blue is the higher income, the light blue is high. So we're in one of the highest price points, most least affordable areas within the county. Bountiful down here is the other dark area. Salt Lake, of course, has other issues. So again, if that's helpful, we can print that and have that available. And it's not the fine grained detail. That sounds like there are other studies that can get that, and we'll work on that together to have those for you as well. But I just thought this would be fun to show you. Employment and travel patterns, if people are working and such. Some of what's already available out there that we can easily get, or if we produce something similar, we can do that. Okay. Well, I said I was done with my comments, and that was my last comment tonight. So I think we've got good direction.
Oh, I was just going to say, I really liked your Steve's point about showing people, showing us cities like Bountiful, because I think as you go along Main Street, people don't realize there's high density housing there. As you're driving down and looking at the cute shops and stuff, they don't realize it's a mixed use area. And so, at least I don't, unless I'm paying attention and looking for it. So I think that's great to show people that it's cities like ours. This is what it looked like before, and this is how it looks now, and see how much people enjoy it and how much of an impact it's made. Again. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's great. So yeah.
Okay. Good discussion. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay. Does that take us to the end of the work session?
I'm complete with my comments, I think, for the evening, and got some marching orders, so unless you have more.
Okay, we'll close the work session and go on to reports, correspondence, and calendar.
So the calendar item that I have, just briefly to discuss, well, one report, I apologize. I think I've reached out to the commission, so for those new commissioners, you got some hard copies tonight. Wi-Fi, I'll continue to bring that up. But we are trying to work with you on a digital basis. It works best for us as staff, and frankly, I think there's some advantages if we get it all working right. So some devices will be provided so that we make sure you have access to those PDF and digital documents. If you haven't received access to new or existing commission members, our Dropbox, which has some additional files, our general plan, other relevant documents, let me know. I'll help you get set onto that, as that can be useful in your considerations of these processes that we work through on a regular basis. As far as the calendar, based on your request, I appreciate the outreach. Sounds like we have at least 5 of our 7 commissioners who will not be available on the 25th. So have a happy 24th of July holiday, and it sounds like hopefully a lot of you have fun plans.
Okay.
I do have some applicants who always have applicants, but would be interested in moving forward with some of their items in development. I can't guarantee they're actually going to be ready. Is there any interest in the commission on attempting to meet prior to, I believe it's August the 8th, which will be your next meeting?
Prior to, so you're just saying a substitute meeting?
Yeah, if for some reason a different day towards the end of the month makes sense. Again, we're working with some subdivision plats where they would love not to wait. We've informed them that they probably are going to have to wait based on our understanding, and so they've had that expectation. But if you feel strongly that we'd rather meet on a different date to accommodate those. We will do our best to have them ready for that.
So it would either be the 18th or the 1st.
Yeah, when both those Thursdays are city council nights, so it would have to be a non-Thursday.
Not on Thursday. Got it. Okay.
So yeah, that limits you.
So what about like the 31st?
I,
That would be a Wednesday, wouldn't it?
I can't do that, but
That wouldn't work.
I can't do the week of the 22nd, I'll be gone. Not that that matters, but, you know. Any other time I can.
Okay, well, look at your calendars, and probably what I will do is, I'll be out tomorrow, but first part of next week, maybe do some outreach.
Okay.
And get a little bit more specific. I think there may be 2 or 3 subdivisions that, again, would be interested in it. And you'll probably have a better response to me if I tell you, yeah, we would be ready with them as staff. I can't tell you that so specifically right now at this point, but even if we were to meet, that we'll be ready to go with them. So I'll try and have some additional insight, and we'll get the feedback by emails or phone call correspondence outside the meeting.
Okay.
Otherwise, August the 8th is the next meeting, and that's on August the 14th, as we discussed, and have on your calendar. That's for the open house. And that's my correspondence for you.
What's the date of that open house again? August what?
It's a Wednesday, August the 14th. And I think you have, and I think there's city council the day after, so you would meet just about a week after that, so we'll try and synthesize some of the information we collect before that 22nd of August meeting with the planning commission.
okay, is that it?
Training opportunity, I'd just like to make you all aware of that we are putting it together on behalf of Salt Lake County, but we've got a number of major sponsors that are joining with us, including UTA and several other big groups. We're bringing in a speaker on August 28th. The session is going to be called Making Strides, Creating Walkable Communities. The speaker's Jeff Speck, who has written 2 great books on walkable communities. Very well recognized nationally. He'll be here August 28th, be doing a luncheon, and then an afternoon seminar. You can attend both or one, whichever you prefer. It'll be at the Vivint Smart Home Arena in the Jazz 100 Club, which is a nice little venue there. And we are getting phenomenal response of people who want to go to this, just by virtue of the fact that this is all about walkable communities, which is what you mentioned this for our downtown here and for other things that we do. So it's a great opportunity if you're interested. I can't remember what the cost was. Lyle, have you seen that? Has it come across your emails?
I don't remember seeing it, so
Okay.
yeah, Jeff Speck is a name I've heard much about, so I think that would
I'll
have stood out,
forward it
and that's
to you.
exciting.
And then maybe you can send it out to the planning commissioners. But if that's something you're interested in, I think it'll be a good opportunity. We've got, like, Taylorsville is sending their entire planning commission to this. They're really hot on this. They've read his book. Taylorsville Planning Commission they started a book club.
Oh, really?
And they read a planning-related book, and they always do it in conjunction with, they invite another planning commission in another city to do it
That's a
with
good
them.
idea.
And then they get together and have a
Interesting.
discussion on it.
That's
And they've read
interesting.
this guy's book, and now they all want to go to the seminar and listen to him and talk to him there. So they're quite a planning commission there in Taylorsville.
That's a good idea.
Josh, I'm ready for your motion. To adjourn.
So moved.
I love